Warren, this question is on Berkshire's intrinsic value. In the annual letter, you appear to strongly signal that Berkshire shares are undervalued, especially relative to intrinsic value. Aside from share buybacks, what actions can Berkshire take to narrow the discount between the current share price and intrinsic value? For example, would you ever consider an IPO of Berkshire's individual operating units?
The answer to the last part is no. But I think we try to explain. My guess is I've never seen an annual report that uses the term intrinsic value or even talks about the intrinsic value of its units or business as much as Berkshire does. So Charlie and I really devote considerable effort to explaining which of our businesses where there's really a significant discrepancy between what carrying value is, or book value, call it carrying value, and the true value or the intrinsic value of the business. And I got very specific in the case of GEICO in the past year, for example, and I said that GEICO, which is carried at about $1 billion over tangible assets, may be worth as much as $20 billion over tangible assets. And I wouldn't be surprised if 5 years or 10 years from now that figure itself will be a lot larger. So we've talked about it. We've said we are willing to buy, not only willing, but eager to buy stock at 120% of book value. Well, with book value being close to $230 billion now, that obviously means we think that at $45 billion roughly over that figure, we are getting a bargain in relation to intrinsic value. But we're never going to try and put out an exact number because we don't know an exact number. And it changes from day to day, and although not a lot day to day, but it certainly changes, over the quarters and over the years. And the second reason is if you ask Charlie and me to write down a figure as we sit here as to the intrinsic value of Berkshire, we'd probably be within 5% of each other. But we probably would not be within 1% of each other. So we will continue to try to give shareholders information about the important units. The small ones are not unimportant to us, but they do not have a big impact on the overall intrinsic value. We've got a few businesses. I mean, we'll have some businesses that may be carried at a few $100 million that might be worth $1 billion or maybe $2 billion even. But that isn't where the big undisclosed by the balance sheet values are. They're in the railroad, they're in the insurance business, they're in our utility business there. And they add up to some pretty big numbers. We try to tell you exactly the numbers and use the words that we use when we're thinking about those businesses ourselves in terms of estimating their value. But we don't want to go further than that. The 120% obviously is a loud shout out as to a figure that we think is very significantly below intrinsic value, or we wouldn't use it to repurchase shares. We only believe in repurchasing shares when we can do so at a significant discount from intrinsic value. Some companies talk about, Coca-Cola does, they talk about buying in shares to cover options. That actually isn't the best reason to buy in shares. I mean, the stock could be overpriced, and even though you issued it on options, you shouldn't be buying it in. But that's become sort of a mantra throughout corporate America, that if you buy shares to cover the option exercises, that you've negated the dilution to shareholders. But again, if you buy shares, if you buy a dollar bill for 90 cents, you're doing your shareholders a favor, and if you buy it for $1.10, you are doing them no favor at all. Charlie?
Well, I don't believe we've ever wanted to get the stock way over intrinsic value so that we can issue it to other people and get an advantage for ourselves and a disadvantage for them. And I think the people that want the stock up very close to intrinsic value or higher really want egg in their beer. It's okay if it's a little below. And we're not in the game of ballooning our stock up as high as we can get it so we can issue it, more of it at a profit to ourselves. I think over the long term, our system will work pretty well, and I think the stock will eventually go above intrinsic value whether we like it or not.
Yeah. But we really watched a lot over the years of certain managers attempting to get their stock to sell for way more than it was worth so they could use it to trade for other companies. I mean, that was all the rage in the late 60s. One of the reasons I wound up my partnership was that activity was going on so much and it affected all other values. And it was really a game, and it was a game that some people played sort of halfway honestly, and other people really cheated like crazy, because if you're trying to get your stock to be overpriced, you're very likely to cheat on your earnings and cheat on projections, cheat on everything. And it works, incidentally. It doesn't work indefinitely, but it works. Some companies whose names you know were to some extent built on that principle. That's a game that we not only don't want to play, we really found it very distasteful because we saw a lot of these people in action. And it comes in waves, and we don't want to come close to playing it. Unless I'm careful, Charlie will name names, so we better move on to shareholders. Well, let's go to station number 2.
Warren and Charlie, on behalf of Morningstar, I want to thank you for having us on the panel this year. I may not be an accredited bear, but hopefully I ask probing questions that add value for shareholders. My first question relates to the measurement of management performance. For Morningstar, the ultimate measure of success is not just whether or not a firm can earn more than its cost of capital, but whether or not it can do so for an extended period of time. Berkshire has historically done a good job of generating outsized returns, but as you've noted in the past, the sheer size of the firm's operations, which continue to grow, will ultimately limit the returns that Berkshire can generate. With that in mind, what do you believe Berkshire's cost of capital is? How much do you think that this hurdle rate has increased as you've acquired more capital-intensive, debt-heavy firms? And how much confidence do you have that future capital allocators at Berkshire will be able to generate returns in excess of the firm's cost of capital, acknowledging, of course, the fact that Berkshire's days of outsized returns are most likely behind it?
Yeah. Well, there's no question that size is an anchor to performance, and we intend to prove that up to the point where it starts really biting. But we cannot earn the returns on capital with well over 200, well, with a market cap of 300 plus billion. It just isn't doable. Archimedes, he said he could move the world if he had a long enough lever, didn't he, or something like that, Charlie? Well, I wish I had his lever because we don't have that lever at Berkshire. We'll answer 2 questions there. In terms of cost of capital, Charlie and I always figure that our cost of capital is what can be produced by our second best idea, and then our best idea has to exceed that. We think, I've listened to so many nonsensical cost of capital discussions that
I've never heard an intelligent one.
Yeah, yeah, it's really true. I mean, and that's another thing. I've been on boards, and the CFO comes in and explains why we're doing this, and it always gets down to, it exceeds our cost of capital, and he doesn't know what the hell his cost of capital is, and I don't know, but I don't embarrass him, so I just sit there and listen to the stuff and apply my own thing, and then still end up voting for it probably if I don't like it, although there have been a few exceptions to that. The real test, over time, is whether what the capital we retain produces more than $1 of market value as we go along. And if we keep putting billions in, and those billions, in effect, are worth, in terms of present value terms, in terms of what they add to the value of the business, more than what we're putting in, we'll keep doing it. We bought a company day before yesterday, I guess it was, and we are spending close to $3 billion US. It's a Canadian company, And we think we will be better off financially because we did that, and we thought it was the best thing that we could do with the $3 billion on that day. And those are the yardsticks that we have. And what I do know is that I've never seen a CEO who wanted to do a deal where the CFO didn't come in and say it exceeded the cost of capital. It's a game as far as we're concerned, and we think we can evaluate businesses, and we know the capital we have available, and we have things that we can sell to buy, not businesses, but marketable securities. We can sell to buy businesses if we like, and we are constantly measuring that opportunity cost that Charlie talked about in the movie. It's an important subject, and one that I think has had more nonsense written about it than about anything, but I'll turn it over to Charlie to go further.
Well, a phrase like cost of capital, which means different things to different people, and often means silly things to people who teach in business schools. We just don't use it. Warren's definition of behaving in a corporation so that every dollar retained tends to create more than a dollar of market value for the shareholders is probably the best way of describing cost of capital. That is not what they mean in business schools. The answer is perfectly simple. We're right and they're wrong.
We always will have $20 billion around Berkshire. We will never be dependent on the kindness of strangers. It didn't work that well for Blanche Dubois either. But in any event, we don't count on bank lines. We don't count on anything. There will be some time in the next 100 years, and it may be tomorrow, and it may be 100 years from now, and nobody knows, where we cannot depend on anybody else to keep our own strength and to maintain our operations. And we've spent too long building Berkshire to have that one moment destroy us. I mean, we lent money, as you probably know, to Harley Davidson at 15%. And we lent it at a time when short-term rates were probably 0.5%. Well, Harley Davidson is a fine company, but it, like Goldman Sachs and General Electric and a bunch of other companies, one of these Tiffany's, they needed, when you need cash, it's the only thing you need, and it's because other people aren't coming up with it. I've always said that, available cash or credit is a lot like oxygen, that you don't notice it, the lack of it, 90% of the time, but if it's absent, it's the only thing you notice. And we don't want to be in that position. So we will keep $20 billion. We will never go to sleep at night worrying about any event that's taken place that could hurt our ability to keep playing our game. And above $20 billion, we'll try to find ways to invest it intelligently. And so far, we've generally done it. I mean, right? We've always had something above that, but we've spent a fair amount of money so far this year. We'll probably spend more later in the year. So far, I feel we can get the cash out at reasonable returns. We never feel a compulsion to use it, though, just because it's there. Charlie?
I think we're very lucky to have these businesses that can employ a lot of new capital at very respectable rates. And if earlier in the history of Berkshire we didn't have such automatic opportunities, and now that we're so affluent, we really are way better off having these opportunities. It's a blessing. I mean, who would want to get rid of Mid-American and the Burlington Northern Railroad? Nobody in his right mind. I mean, we love the opportunity to invest more capital intelligently in a world where short-term interest rates are 0.5% or lower.
And we love the opportunity to go in with 3G at Heinz and
Yes.
employ significant capital. we'll get the chances to use capital. Eventually, compound interest will catch up with us, and it certainly dampened things, but it hasn't delivered its final blow yet. Station 6.
See's Candy is obviously small in the context of Berkshire's currently expansive operations, but has long been one of your favorite businesses, and no wonder, given that its pre-tax profits grew consistently from less than $5 million in 1972 when Berkshire acquired it to $74 million in 1999. However, since 1999, profit growth appears to have stalled. Can you explain why See's was able to grow its profits through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, but not so far in this millennium? Did something change about the business, for instance, the growth in demand for boxed chocolates or its market position? Could you or Brad Kinsler discuss whether the relatively recent geographic expansion could help reignite See's growth? Thank you.
Yeah, the boxed chocolate business is basically not growing. I mean, if you go back 100 years, each city of any size was characterized by lots of candy shops. Chicago was a big leader. New York was a big leader. Believe it or not, the predecessor company to Pepsi-Cola was a company with the most, it was a company called Lofts that had the most candy shops in New York City. It was a candy shop company originally that a fellow that, what was his name? Yeah, what was it, Frank?
Guft.
Yeah, he acquired Pepsi for a few $1,000, stuck it in Lofts, and the corporate name, if you go all the way back on Pepsi, is Lofts. So there were loads of candy shops around every place, and including in Omaha. Boxed chocolates have lost position dramatically. Primarily, I would guess, to salted snacks of one sort or another, various things. See's has done remarkably well, far better than any chocolate company in the country. Russell Stover did very well for a while, very well, with a different business model. But, they ran into their problems as well. So we can't do much about increasing the size of the market. And we've tried a lot of ways. And we've tried moving out of our strong geography multiple times. I mean, Charlie and I looked at what we were earning in California in the 70s and said to ourselves, if we can do this in 50 states instead of one, we'll get very rich. So we tried it, and we didn't get very rich. It doesn't travel that well.
Well, sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. And you figure out whether it's going to work by trying it.
Yeah, and we've tried it many times. But so far, it's interesting. 2/3 people in the East prefer dark chocolate, 2/3 to 1/3. In the West, they prefer milk chocolate, 2/3 to 1/3. They like miniatures in the East. They won't eat miniatures in the West. There's a lot of different things. But in the end, there isn't a lot of boxed chocolates volume. And we've done very, very, very well in See's. And it not only has provided us with earnings that we've used to buy other businesses, so we've added lots of earnings power through See's beyond the earning power we've added at See's. But it opened my eyes to the power of brands, and probably you could say that we made a lot of money in Coca-Cola partly because we bought See's, or at least in my case bought See's because I'd understood brands to some degree, but there's nothing like owning one and sort of seeing the possibilities with it as well as the limitations to educate yourself about things you might do in the future. And in 1972 we bought See's, and in 1988 we bought Coca-Cola, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if we had not owned See's, whether we would have owned Coca-Cola later on. Charlie?
Yeah, there's no question about the fact that its main contribution to Berkshire was ignorance removal. And And it's not the only big contributor to ignorance removal. If it weren't for the fact we were so good at removing our ignorance step by step, Berkshire would be practically nothing today. What we knew originally wasn't enough. We were pretty damn stupid when we bought Seas. We were just barely smart enough to buy it. And if there's any secret to Berkshire, it's the fact that we're pretty good at ignorance removal. And the nice thing about that is we have a lot of ignorance left to remove.
Since Berkshire started to transfer some of the responsibility for the company's investment portfolio over Todd Combs and Ted Weschler, the two men have gone from managing around $3 billion each in early 2012 to managing more than $7 billion each earlier this year. That said, this still represents less than 10% of the equity portion of your investment portfolio, with big legacy positions in Wells Fargo, Coca-Cola, American Express, IBM, and Procter & Gamble overshadowing the rest of the holdings. Can you give us an update on how much money each of your lieutenants is now running and how much you see that growing into over the next 5 years? And given that both men have seemingly been involved in things beyond their roles as portfolio managers the last couple of years, how much do you expect their roles to expand over time? And on a completely separate note, at what point can we expect to see Todd and Ted join you and Charlie up there on stage to talk about their efforts managing Berkshire's investment portfolio?
I got through college answering fewer questions than that, but they are managing about, it's a little over $7 billion now. We will change that periodically, and it will always be upward, but we don't change it month by month. Their portfolios may change in value month by month, but they will be handling more money in the future than they are now. I think to some extent, they as well as I've had the unpleasant experience of handling more and more money as years go by. They are seeing that it does get a little more difficult as the sums get larger, but it's still far better to keep moving money over to them and away from me as time passes, and that'll continue to be the case. They're both terrific additions to Berkshire beyond their investment skills, in that they each know a whole lot about business, they know a whole lot about management, and there are a lot of things that come across the desk at Berkshire that I get an idea on, but I just don't feel like carrying out myself, because they might involve a lot of time, particularly if they get involved in negotiating small points and that sort of thing. So Ted and Todd have both, as I mentioned in the report, been very helpful in doing things beyond their investment management duties that have added a significant value to Berkshire, and I think it's a cinch that will continue. They want to do it. They enjoy doing it. They don't ask for extra compensation at all because they do it. They're 100% attuned to Berkshire. They know how I think, and if I tell them, here's a deal that I think makes sense, if you can get it done, they'll know why it makes sense, and they'll know how to get it done, and they'll spend the time to do it. So it's been a big plus for Berkshire to bring them on board, and they'll be more important factors as the years go by. Okay. Charlie? I'm sorry.
Nothing to add.
Okay.
How's that?
Station 9.
This is a question that comes, and I hope I pronounce your name correctly, Michael. It's Michael Lachek, and he says, Energy Future Holdings' likely bankruptcy is a consequence of unexpected and dramatic decline in prices of natural gas prices caused by a revolution in drilling technology. To what extent do you believe other assets held in Berkshire's portfolio, debt, equity, etc., may be subject to disruptive technological or other changes that erode business models and barriers to entry? For example, changes in consumer behavior and regulation could affect Coca-Cola, Revolution in payment systems could affect American Express. Ever-increasing rate of change in technology and competitive landscape could affect IBM. Wireless delivery of media content and urbanization could be disruptive to DirecTV. Could you also comment on whether participation of some sponsors of Energy Future Holdings, which include the very best of private equity, contributed to your decision to invest? Was a degree of crowd mentality at play, and what lessons are to be learned from the experience?
Yeah, well, I would be unwilling to share the credit for my decision to invest in Energy Future Holdings with anybody else. I would think that's very unfair of anyone to insinuate that they had anything to do with that decision. That was just a mistake on my part. It was a significant mistake, and we will make mistakes in the future. All businesses should constantly be thinking about what can mess up their business model. And with Energy Future Holdings, it was a fairly simple assumption that was made that just turned out to be wrong. I mean, the assumption there was that gas prices would stay roughly as high as they were or go higher, and so they went a whole lot lower. And at that point, the whole place toppled. They had a lot of reserve holdings, and they had some futures positions which kept them alive for a while, but that was a basic error. We look at all of our businesses as subject to change. A classic case would be Geico. I mean, Geico set out in 1936 to operate at low costs and pass on those low costs to the customer through lower prices for something that was a necessity, auto insurance. And they originally did it by mail offerings, U.S. Postal Service, to people who were government employees. That's where the name comes from, Geico, Government Employees Insurance Company. And they had to adapt over the years, and they adapted first to widening classifications, but they went from the U.S. mail primarily to the telephone, and later went to internet and on to social media. But in there they stumbled one time too as they went to adapt, and when they left the government employees classification, at one point they became too aggressive about expanding, and they really did go broke. So there's changes going on all of the time, and it's going on with all of our businesses, and we want managers that are thinking about change and what's going to be needed for their business model of the future. And we know they're not going to look the same 5 or 10 years from now. I mean, BNSF, something as basic as railroads, is looking big at LNG for its locomotives. Everything is going to change. Our businesses generally deal from strength, and they're generally not subject to rapid change, but they're all subject to change. And of course, slow change can be much harder to perceive and can lull you to sleep easier sometimes than when rapid change is clearly in sight. So I would say, in answer to that question, I will make mistakes in the future. I mean, that's guaranteed. We do not make anything like bet the company decisions that will ever cause us real anguish. That just doesn't happen at Berkshire. But you're not going to make a lot of decisions without making some significant mistakes. Occasionally, they work out very well. Charlie and I and Sandy Gottesman in 1966 bought a department store in Baltimore. Now, there's probably nothing dumber than buying a department store in the mid-1960s. There were 4 department stores on the corner of Howard and Lexington Street in Baltimore in 1966, and none of them are there. And the #1 store, Hustlers, went broke a little later than our store went broke. But fortunately, Sandy did a great job of selling it. So the $6 million invested in that department store became worth about $45 billion in Berkshire Hathaway stock as we did other things with the money as we went along. So you do have to be very alert to what is going on in your businesses, and we want our managers to do that. But actually, it's something that Charlie and I and our directors are going to think about as well as our managers. Charlie?
Yeah, I spoke earlier about the desirability of removing your ignorance piece by piece. And there's another trick, which is scrambling out of your mistakes. And we've been quite good at both. And it's enormously useful. Imagine Berkshire, a textile mill, sure to go broke because power costs in New England were about twice as high as they were in TVA country. A sure to fail department store, and a trading stamp sure to be forced out of business by a change in mode. Out of that comes Berkshire Hathaway. Talk about scrambling out of mistakes. I think of what we might have done if we had had a better start.
Yeah. The point was driven home to me. My great-grandfather started a grocery store here in Omaha in 1869, and my grandfather was running it in 1929, and he wrote my uncle, who was going to be running it with him. And the letter started out, this is in 1929, "The day of the change store is over." And that is why we ended up with one grocery store which went out of business in 1969. You really have to face facts around you, and the wish being father to the thought was unfortunately what overcame my grandfather. Okay, Jay?
Hi, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger. My name is Dev Kantasaria, and I'm a fund manager from Philadelphia. You've touched on some of this already today, but I wanted to ask if you could expand on how you think about comparing investment opportunity. In the past, you haven't been afraid to make a single position a large portion of your portfolio, such as Coca-Cola. So when there is a chance to buy more of your favorite names, as in 2008, in early 2009, how did the case of buying more of companies like Coca-Cola or even a Moody's, which had dropped from 75 to 15 as examples, compare with other things that you actually did? Could Berkshire have achieved its historical returns with a more simple, concentrated portfolio of your favorite names with positive characteristics such as durable competitive advantage, pricing power, strong organic growth, etc., versus the larger, more complex collection of businesses which exist today? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, depends which favorite name we might have hit harder back in the 2008 and 2009 period. In the first instance, I spent a considerable part of our cash reserves too early, looking back, too early in the 2009 panic. The bottom of that was reached early in March in 2009, and that bottom was quite a bit lower than September and October of 2008 when we spent 16 or so billion. Now, we were committed to finance Mars for $6.6 billion, and that commitment had been made many months earlier, so we didn't really have much choice in terms of the timing of that. But we did fine on the expenditures we made during that period, but obviously we didn't do as well, remotely as well, as if we'd kept all of the powder dry and then just spent it all at once at the bottom. But we've never really figured out how to do that, and we won't figure out how to do that. So the timing could have been improved dramatically. On the other hand, as late as the late fall of October 2009, when the economy was still in the dumps, really in the dumps, we were able to buy BNSF, which will be an enormous part of our future. So overall, we did reasonably well going through that period, but looking back, the most money would have been made just by buying a bundle of stocks. When we were buying Harley-Davidson bonds at 15, looking back, we should have been buying the stock, but that'll always be the case. Overall, we would love the idea. What really we want to do at our present size and scope and with the objectives we've got for our shareholders is we want to buy big businesses with good management at reasonable prices and then try to build them over time. I mean, when we start 2014, we've got a really good group of businesses, some of them very big. Now, those businesses will earn more over time. And then what we're trying to do is add on to them and make sure we don't issue any shares in the process. So it's not a complicated process. And looking back, we'll always be able to do it better than we've done it. That's just the nature of things. But I feel the game is still a very viable one and will be for some time. It won't be forever. It can't be forever. But it's still got some juice left in it. Charlie?
Well, what's happened, of course, is the private businesses that we control have gotten to be a bigger and bigger percentage of the thing. For a great many of the early years, we had more in common stocks than the total value of the company. And so it was like a big portfolio of common stocks and a lot of businesses thrown in as extras. And now, of course, the private companies are worth way more than the stocks. And I would guess that will continue, wouldn't you, Warren?
Sure, it'll continue. And the difference is when we're right about stocks, it shows up in market value and in net worth. When we're right about businesses, it shows up in future earning power, which you can see, but it doesn't jump out at you the same way changes in stock values do. So it's a different sort of buildup of value, and one is somewhat easier to see than the other, but the other is more enduring and does not require going from flower to flower. And they're both fine, but we've moved into phase two. Say that's fair, Charlie?
Yeah, well, if you're just investing moderate amounts of capital in the middle of some panic, if you take the bottom tick, it's a very attractive price. But no significant volume of the shares could have been purchased at that price. And so when we buy these businesses, we can get huge chunks of money into things. And now if we'd wanted to go much heavier into Moody's, we couldn't have bought that much anyway.
No.
Yeah, so we are sort of forced by our own past success more into these bigger positions represented by the private companies. But really that's in the advantage of all of us, I think.
Yeah.
I love it when we buy transmission lines in Alberta. I don't think anything horrible is going to happen to Alberta. Nor do I think transmission...
If it does, we won't know it.
Yeah, right. And no, I think we've adapted pretty well to changes in our circumstances. And that, again, is part of life. I mean, since change is inevitable, how well you adapt to it is terribly important. And I would say the changes that many of you have watched in Berkshire over the years have been very much in our interest. And then there may be future changes that are just as desirable.
We bought a fair amount of Wells Fargo, for example, really over the last few years. And because the economy came back, really the most money, if you were buying at the bottom, came from buying the banks of lesser quality because their weaknesses drove them down to even further in price, and they needed a good economy to come back. But they were kind of like a marginal copper producer or something. You make more money if copper goes up, not if you buy the best copper company, but if you buy the worst one, because they have the highest marginal cost, but that gives them the biggest kick on profits. To some extent, that's been true, for example, the banks. But we felt 100% comfortable buying Wells Fargo, and we might have felt 50% comfortable buying some others, and so we went where we were comfortable. Looking back, you can say we should have just bought them all, and in fact, bought the ones that had the worst record going into 2008 or 9, because they had the greatest recovery possibility simply because they'd fallen so far. Andrew? It's a good question. Some of the people in the audience are identifying with it. I can hear them. It is a question of being self-realistic, and that applies outside of business as well. I think Charlie and I have been reasonably good at identifying what I would call the perimeter of that circle of competence, but obviously we've gone out of it. I would say that in my own case, I've gone out of it more often in retail than in any other arena. I think it's easy to sort of think you understand retail and then subsequently find out you don't, as we did with the department store in Baltimore. You can say I was outside of my circle of competence when I bought Berkshire Hathaway, although I bought it really to resell as a stock originally. I probably was out of my circle of competence when I decided that I should go in and buy control of the company. That was a dumb decision, which worked out. Being appraising your own talents and shortcomings, I think. I don't know whether that's innate, but some people seem a whole lot better at it than others. And I certainly know of a number of CEOs that I feel have no idea of where their circle of competence begins and ends. But we've got a number of managers who I think are just terrific at it. I mean, they really know when they're playing in the game they're going to win in, and they don't go outside of that game. The ultimate was Mrs. B at the Furniture Mart. She told me that she did not want stock in terms of the Berkshire Hathaway deal. Now, that may sound like it was a bad decision. It was a splendid decision. She did not know anything about stock, but she knew a lot about what to do with cash. She knew real estate, she knew retailing, and she knew exactly what she knew and what she didn't know. And that took her a long, 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 long way in business life. And that ability to know when you're playing the game in which you're going to win and playing outside of that game is a huge asset. I can't tell you the best way to develop a great sense of that about yourself. You might get some of your friends that know you well to offer contributions. Charlie's given me a few contributions occasionally, saying, "What the hell do you know about that?" That's one way of putting it, of course. But Charlie, can you help him out?
Well, I don't think it's as difficult to figure out competence as it may appear to you. If you're 5'2", you don't have much of a future in the National Basketball League. And if you're 95 years of age, you probably shouldn't try and act the romantic lead part in Hollywood. And if you weigh 350 pounds, you probably shouldn't try and dance the lead part in the Bolshoi Ballet. And if you can hardly count cards at all, you probably shouldn't try and win chess tournaments playing blindfolded, and so on and so on.
You're ruling out everything I want to do.
But competency is a relative concept. And what a lot of us need, including the one speaking, is what I needed to get ahead was to compete against idiots. And luckily, there's a large supply. And
Mr. Buffett, Mr. Munger, my name is Nicholas Erdenberger. I hail from the beautiful Garden State of New Jersey. And I guess the question...
Applause.
So I guess this is a follow-up question to the question before. I really connect with the idea of not investing in industries you can't fully understand. Being a young guy who has limited ability to code and who can't build robots, tech is certainly not an industry I fully understand. And yet these days, the concept of entrepreneurship is nearly synonymous with tech amongst people my age. So my question to you, Mr. Buffett, is if you were 23 years old with entrepreneurial tendencies, what non-tech industry would you start a business in and why?
I'd probably do just what I did when I was 23. I would go into the investment business, and I would look at lots of companies, and I would go and talk to lots of people, and I would try to learn from them what I could about different industries. One thing I did when I was 23, if I got interested in the coal business, I would go out and see the CEOs of 8 or 10 coal companies. And the interesting thing was I never made appointments usually or anything. I just dropped in, but they fellow from Omaha who looked like me couldn't be too harmful, so they'd always see me. And I'd ask them a lot of questions, but one question I'd always ask them, two questions at the end. I would ask them if they had to put all of their money into any coal company except their own and go away for 10 years and couldn't change it, which one would it be and why? And then I would say, after I got an answer to that, I would say, and if as part of that deal they had to sell short an equivalent amount of money in one coal company, which would it be and why? And if I went around and talked to everybody in the coal business about that, I would know more about the coal companies from an economic standpoint than any one of those managers probably would. So I think there's lots of ways to learn about business. You're not going to learn how to start another Facebook or Google that way, but you can learn a lot about the economic characteristics of companies by reading, personal contact. You do have to have a real curiosity about it. I mean, I don't think you can do it because your mother's telling you to do it or something of the sort. I think it really has to turn you on. And I mean, what could turn you on more than around asking questions about coal companies? Yeah, that maybe be a little odd too, but that's what I would do. And I might, in the process of doing that, find some industry that particularly interested me. In my case, the insurance industry did. And you might become very well equipped, even perhaps to start your own insurance company, but perhaps to pick the most logical one to go to work for. If you just keep learning things, something will come along that you'll find extremely useful to do. I mean, but you've got to be open to it. Charlie?
Well, you might try a version of the trick that Larry Bird used. When he wanted an agent to negotiate his new contract, he asked every agent why he should be selected, and if he was not going to be selected, whom the agent would recommend. And since everybody recommended the same number two choice, Larry Bird just hired him and negotiated the best contract in history. Yeah. There are a lot of tricks that people use.
We did the same thing as Solomon, actually. There was a Saturday morning when I called, and you were there, Charlie, weren't you?
Yes,
sure. I called in, I don't know whether it was 8 or 10 of the managers. I just gotten in there on Friday afternoon, and now it's Saturday morning, and we had to open for business Sunday night in Tokyo, and I had to have somebody to run the place. So I called in 8 people, and I said, who beside you would be the ideal person to run this and why? One guy told me that there was nobody compared to him. He was gone from the firm within a few months, but it's not a bad system to use. You can really learn a lot just by asking. I mean, it's starting to sound a little like a Yogi Berra quote or something, but it is literally true that if you talk to enough people about something they know something about, and people like to talk, and here we are talking ourselves. And you just have to be open to it, and you will find your spot. You may not find it the first day or the week or month, but you'll find what fascinates you. I was very lucky because I found what fascinated me when I was 7 or 8 years of age. But some people find chess or music fascinates them when they're 4 or 5. If you're lucky, you find it early, and sometimes it takes you longer, but you'll find it.
If it's a very competitive business and it plainly requires qualities that you lack, it should probably be avoided. When I was at Caltech, I took thermodynamics, and Homer Joe Stewart, who was a genius, taught the course. And it was perfectly apparent to me that no amount of time or effort would turn me into a Homer Joe Stewart. He was utterly, impossibly more talented than I could be. Gave up. I immediately decided I wasn't going to try and be a professor of thermodynamics at Caltech. And I've done that with field after field, and pretty soon there was only 1 or 2 left.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a similar experience in athletics. Okay, Becky.
Mr. Buffett, my name is Neil Patel from Chicago. I greatly admire the way you have lived a frugal personal life, even with your considerable wealth. How do you think your frugality has helped Berkshire shareholders over the years? And Charlie, are there any instances where you think that Warren's frugality has hurt Berkshire as shareholders?
Well, first of all, let's ask who is the more frugal between us. Charlie, who do you think is
Well, in personal consumption, Warren is more frugal.
Would you care to give an example?
Warren lives in the same house he bought for a very modest price, what, in 1950 something?
I bought it in 1958, and you moved into yours about 1960, didn't you?
Yeah, and I paid more.
But he designed his own. He designed his own house. He did not pay an architect, right?
I did. I paid an architect $1,900. It was as much as 30% of the normal price.
Yeah. Notice how he remembers the details. No, I have everything in life I want. It's a very simple thing. If there's anything that money could buy, there are things money can't buy. But if there's anything money could buy that I wanted, I'd do it this afternoon. I wouldn't have any problem with that at all. I do not think that standard of living equates with cost of living beyond a certain point. I mean, up to a certain point, there's no question that it does. I mean, in terms of having good housing, good health service, good food, everything. But good transportation. But there's a point, I think, if anything, you start getting inverse correlation. My life would not be happier. In fact, it'd be worse if I had 6 or 8 houses, or a whole bunch of different things I could have. It just doesn't correlate, and so having everything I have, I mean, you can't have more than that, and that doesn't really make any. It makes a difference up to a point. I mean, you can start thinking a lot differently when you got to X, but when you get to 10X or 100X or 1,000X, it just doesn't make any possible difference. But, Charlie, can you?
Frugality basically has helped Berkshire, and I look out at this audience and I see a bunch of understated frugal people too. We collect you people.
But forget about it this weekend. The more you buy, the more you save at these prices, folks. Okay, Andrew.
Hi, Warren and Charlie. Dan Hua from Los Angeles. My wife, Cora, and I are thrilled to be here.
We're delighted to have you.
Thank you. You earlier today discussed intrinsic value, and I'm a big fan of Graham and Fisher, especially security analysis. What differences do you have, if any, for calculating intrinsic value versus what was said in security analysis? And for example, how does management factor into that? You recently mentioned evaluating management is like dating. And recently, you said also management does matter. My second part is, which company do you fear the most? Why is it that no one else has done what you have done? I mean, Coca-Cola has their Pepsi. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, Graham didn't get too specific about intrinsic value in terms of precise calculations. But intrinsic value has come to be equated with, and I think quite properly, with what you might call private business value. Now, I'm not sure who was the first one that came up with it, but, well, the first one that came up with it was Aesop, actually. But the intrinsic value of any business, if you could foresee the future perfectly, is the present value of all cash that will be ever distributed for that business between now and Judgment Day. And we're not perfect at estimating that, obviously. But that's what an investment or a business is all about. You put money in and you take money out. Aesop said a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Now, he said that around 600 BC or something like that. But that hasn't been improved on very much by the business professors now. Now, the question is, how sure are you that there are two in the bush? How far away is the bush? There are all kinds of things. What are interest rates? But, I mean, Aesop wanted to leave us something to play with over the next couple thousand years, so he didn't spell the whole thing out. But that's what intrinsic value essentially is. We don't. Graham would say that. Phil Fisher would say that. Phil Fisher would say that in calculating that, he would want to look a lot harder at the qualitative factors of the business in making that estimate of how many birds were in the bush. Graham would say he would want to see the bush, $2 worth of cash in the bush, and to pay $1 for it now. And one emphasized quantitative factors and one emphasized qualitative factors, but neither one would have disagreed with the math. And I started out very influenced by Graham, so I emphasized quantitative factors. Charlie came along and said I was all wrong, and that he'd learned more in law than I'd learned in financial studies and everything, and that I should think more about qualitative factors, and he was right. And Phil Fisher said the same thing. But that's what intrinsic value is about. If you buy a McDonald's franchise, if you buy General Motors, whatever it may be, the real question is, A, are you going to have to put more cash into it after you buy it? But it's really cash in, cash out, when, what discount rate, all the standard stuff. In terms of if I had a silver bullet, what company would I shoot as being a threat to us? I don't see any competitor to Berkshire. I see private equity buying lots of businesses and having an advantage in that they'll leverage up when we won't, and also that presently they can borrow money very cheap and all of that. So, I mean, there are always going to be people competing with us to buy businesses, which is our main occupation for me and Charlie. But I don't see anybody that's got a model or trying to build a model that will essentially go after what we're trying to achieve, which is to buy wonderful businesses from people that care about where their business goes and who generally want to keep on running them. Charlie?
Well, as I've said earlier, I think the Berkshire model, as now constructed, will have what they said in show business was legs. It will go a long time. And I think it will be quite creditable. And I think it has enough advantage that it will just keep going a long time. And I think most big businesses don't. If you stop to think about it, all the great big businesses of yesteryear, how few of them have really gotten big and stayed big. Of the really old businesses, only one stayed big, and that was Rockefeller's Standard Oil. And so we're getting up into a territory where very few people keep going well. But I think we'll be more like Standard Oil than we'll be like ordinary businesses, because I think we will just keep going. We will keep doing what we're already doing, and we'll keep learning from our mistakes. And the people up here are no longer all that important. The momentum's in place, the ethos is in place. It's going to keep going. And if you young people in the audience, I always say, don't be too quick to sell the stock.
My name's Ed Boyle, and from Chicago. My question's for Warren and Charlie. Do you ever have any plans, or would you be interested in buying a professional sport team or sports equipment manufacturing company, being that sports is in a global world today, or is this out of the Berkshire game?
Warren's already done it.
I owned a quarter of a minor league team, but it's not responsible for my position on the Forbes 400. The answer to your question about buying a sports team is no. In fact, if Charlie and I, if you read that either one of us is buying a sports team, it may be time to talk about successors. Sports equipment has generally not been a very good business. Obviously Nike's done incredibly well in its overall operation, but we own Spalding, we own Russell, and Spalding has been around a long, long time. A.G. Spalding, I forget when the hell he was. I think he was trying to take baseball to the rest of the world back in the 1880s or something like that. But it's, generally speaking, if you look at the people that have made golf equipment, footballs, helmets particularly, baseball gloves, baseballs, it's not been a particularly profitable business. And certain aspects of it, like helmets, the last thing Berkshire should do is own a helmet company. A helmet company should be owned by some guy that owes about $1 million and doesn't have a dime to his name, because he is not going to be a target, and we would be the ultimate target. And we got offered the chance to buy the whole place, and the idea of owning a business that provided guards at airports, when anything that went wrong, you're going to say that it was the guard's fault. And here's this super rich corporation around there that is a perfect target. I mean, a guard company at airports, again, should be owned by somebody whose net worth does not get out to two figures. So that you won't see much of us in the sports arena now. But, Charlie, are you looking at the Clippers? Or now I'm worried that he is. No.
Whatever Warren thinks about sports teams ownership, I like it less.
Okay, Andrew.
Good afternoon, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger. My name is Gaoling Yingyun, and I came from Shanghai, China. I focus on the education investment. Today, my co-worker in an education company and I have a question. What do you think about the education market in America and China in future? Thank you.
Well, we certainly are getting the easy questions late in the day.
Yeah.
I think America...
Whatever he says, I agree with.
I think America made a huge mistake when they allowed the public schools, and I think the Asian cultures are less likely to do that. So to the extent that Asian cultures are avoiding some of our mistakes, why, I just wish we were more like them.
Okay. I probably shouldn't tell you this when Charlie having a little trouble there on those last two words. I get a little worried about Charlie. Don't know whether I should talk about this, but I thought maybe he was losing his hearing, and I didn't want to confront him with it. I mean, we've been pals for a long time, so I went to the doctor and I said, Doc, I've got this wonderful partner, but I think maybe his hearing is going on him, and I don't want to talk to him about it. I mean, how do you say that to somebody you've known that long? And what should I do? He says, well, you stand across the room, talk to him in a normal course of tone of voice, and let me know what happens. So the next time I was with Charlie, I stood across the room and I said, Charlie, I think we ought to buy General Motors at 35. Do you agree? Not a flicker. I go halfway across the room. I said, Charlie, I think we ought to buy General Motors at 35. Do you agree? Nothing. Get right next to him, in his ear. Charlie, I think we ought to buy General Motors at 35. Do you agree? He said, for the third time, yes.
My name is Michael Sondag, and I'm from Washington, D.C. My question's about the sharing economy. What larger implications do you expect companies like Uber and Airbnb to have on their sectors, and do you think this business model is here to stay?
Well, they're obviously trying to disrupt some other businesses, and those businesses will fight back in competitive ways, and they may try to fight back through legislation. When anybody is threatened or any business is threatened, it tries to fight back. If you go back to when State Farm came on the scene in 1921, or 20 or whenever it was, the agency system was sacrosanct in terms of insurance. It had been around forever, and the big companies were in Hartford or New York, and they fought over having the number one agency in town. So if you came to Omaha and you were Travelers or Aetna or whomever it might be, your objective was to get the agent, and the policyholder really wasn't being thought about. And then State Farm came along, and they had a better mousetrap, and then Geico came along with a better mousetrap yet. And so the industries originally, the insurance companies fought back in a lot of ways, but one of the ways they tried to do it was to insist, on various state laws involving what agents could do and what could not be done in insurance without agents and all that. That's standard, and you'll see that. And in the end, the better mousetrap usually wins. But the people with the second or third best mousetrap will try to keep that from happening. The ones you name, I don't know anything about. I mean, I know what they do, but I don't know their specific prospects, which is why we kind of stay away from that sort of thing, because we know there'll be change, and we don't know who the winners will be, and we try to stick with businesses where we know the winners. We know and that our energy companies, that our railroad, a lot of our businesses are very, very, very likely to be winners, and that doesn't mean they don't have some change involved with them, but they're going to be winners. And then there's other fields where we can't pick the winners, and so we just sit and watch, and we find them interesting, but we don't get tempted. Charlie?
Well, I think the new technology is going to be quite disruptive to a lot of people. And I think retailing in particular is facing some very significant threats. And you heard Greg Abel talk about a power plant in Iowa that was huge to serve one Google's server farm. When you get computer capacity all over the world on this scale, it is changing the world. I mean, you're talking about
fast, too.
Yeah, and fast. So, and I think it's going to hurt a lot of people, just as all the past technology investments hurt a lot of people. I think Berkshire, by and large, is in pretty good shape.
Where do you think we're most vulnerable?
Well, I don't think I want to name them.
Okay. Now you've got them all wondering, Charlie. Section 3.
Good afternoon. My name is Diane Weiland, and I'm from Hollywood, Florida. I've worked in public education for over 35 years. My concern is that I think that we need to do more to proactively prepare our children and youth to be financially literate, especially in light of the serious financial stresses many adults in our society face on a daily basis. My question is, do you think that financial literacy should be a standard part of the curriculum in our nation's schools? And if so, how early do you think it should begin? And what do you think some of the most important learning goals would be?
Well, certainly the earlier the better. I mean, habits are such a powerful force in everyone's life, and certainly good financial habits. I see it all the time. I get letters every day from people that have committed some kind of financial lunacy or another, but they didn't know it was lunacy, and they didn't get taught that. Their parents didn't teach it to them, and digging yourself out of the holes that financial illiteracy can cause, you spend the rest of your lifetime doing it. So I'm very sympathetic to what you're talking about. We've done a little bit. I don't know whether you saw our Secret Millionaires Club exhibit in the exhibition hall. And you want to talk to people at a very young age. Charlie and I were lucky. I mean, we got it in our families, so that we were learning it at the dinner table before we knew what we were learning, and that happens in a lot of families, and in a lot of families it doesn't happen. And of course, you mentioned about childhood financial literacy. There's a big problem with adult financial literacy, and it's harder to be smarter or have better habits than your parents unless the schools intercede or probably the schools are your best bet. But it can be done a lot can be done on television or through the internet. But it is really important to have good financial habits, and I think anything you can do very early through the school system, would certainly have my vote. Charlie?
Well, I'm not sure the schools are at fault. I would place most of the fault with the parents. I think the most powerful example is the behavior of the parent. And so if you're...
I agree with it. The most important thing is the parents, but not everybody gets the right parents.
Yeah, well, it's very hard to fix people who have the wrong parents.
Well, let's just say you had the job of fixing people that had the wrong parents. What would you do about it?
Well, let's suppose you had the job of living forever. What would you do about it? I mean, it gets to be so impractical. Who would ever believe that I would have any ability to fix all the people that have the wrong parents?
How about a few?
I don't think I'm good at that either. The only thing I've ever been slightly good at in my life is raising the top higher. It's just that they left the talent out of me. I don't scorn it. I think it's a noble work. I'm no good at it. I don't think you're so hot either.
If he had been in public, it'd have been stronger. Stop by our Secret Millionaires Club, though, and may get some ideas.
By the way, the main troubles with education in this field are probably not in the grade schools. They're probably in the colleges. There's a lot of asininity taught in the finance courses at the major universities, and even the departments of economics have much wrong with them. So if you really want to start fixing the world, you shouldn't assume that when it gets highfalutin, it's a lot better.
Well, there was certainly a period of at least 20 years, I would say, when I think the net utility of knowledge given to finance majors was negative in major universities. I think maybe it's getting better now, but it is.
Imagine that net utility was negative. It was pluperfect asinine.
Yeah.
We should use normal English.
I'm worried about what English you're going to use. I don't want to egg him on. Frankly, it was fascinating to me because here was something I understood. And to watch extraordinary universities that essentially were teaching people some very, very dumb things, and where even to obtain positions in the departments of those schools, you had to subscribe to this orthodoxy, which made no sense at all. And it got stronger and stronger, and then now it's changing to quite a degree. But it may have soured my feeling on higher education to an unwarranted degree, because that, it may have been particularly bad in the area that I was familiar with, but it was bad. Is my language okay, Charlie?
You would have liked academics better if you'd taken physics instead of finance.
Yeah, well, I'm glad I didn't. Okay.